Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about heroes once again. First of all, I'm going to get my head out of the clouds from my last couple of videos, and I'm going to talk in a more down-to-earth way about heroes, although I would like to return to the ideal hero and how that fits into logical storytelling and efficient storytelling. But for now, I'm going to talk about heroes as they are being presented right now within comics, and how that idea of what a hero is being twisted around so much by current comics that they are actually presenting what is a villain as if they were a hero. Now, someone had asked why I keep going over the same ground. They said they've been listening to my channel for more than a year, and I seem to go over the same thing. Why don't we just ignore Marvel and DC and focus on what comics are beginning to take hold, what comics we can find out on the internet or within indie comics? Well, first of all, I would say that it is extremely important to defend the idea of what a hero actually is. In itself, it is important. But if you're looking at it in a way that affects the industry, well, the problem is that Marvel controls most of the comic industry, and as Marvel goes, so does DC go. And when Marvel and DC go in a certain direction, that is going to affect everybody and everything within that industry. So it's going to affect what kind of comics you get to read. It doesn't matter if it's on the internet. It doesn't matter if it's indie comics. It's going to affect that. And especially as a producer of comics, it's going to affect your audience and how much of an audience you actually get. Because I'm making the assertion here that what Marvel is doing and DC on its coattails is presenting a villain as if they were a hero. That is to say, they are corrupting the idea of heroes so much that what they are presenting to people as heroes is a villain. And when that idea becomes known to the general public of the comic reader and the normal general public of people who have some inkling of what comics are about, they're going to abandon that medium. They're going to write it off completely. And so, again, that would affect the comics that you get to read. That would affect the comics that you can sell because it affects the number of people that you can attract to this medium. And in talking about this, I'm going to go back to the same well that I usually go back to. It's one of Marvel's major podcasts, and it's the Women of Marvel podcast. And the reason why I go back to this so much is because, in effect, this is the personal podcast of Sana Amanat. And Sana Amanat is the second in command at Marvel Comics. Operationally, I would say she is the one in control of Marvel Comics, and she is the vice president of content and character development. So she is the one who is shaping what you see within Marvel Comics, which is then being parroted by DC Comics, which is then being parroted by the rest of the industry, which is affecting everyone and everything that we are looking at in the comic industry. And what their podcast is talking about this week is a new show on Marvel Plus. It's called Marvel Heroes Project. So what they do in this show is that they take these kids, these very quote-unquote progressive-minded kids, mind you, and they give them a platform so that they can talk about, and these are Sana Amanat's words, they can talk about who they are and why they are so special. And at the end of every episode, what they do is they get a comic book produced of these children where they are the hero within these stories. And they are actually producing comic books based upon these kids. Now, they're only one each, and as far as I know, they're only digitally. I'm not entirely sure if they are producing any hard copies of these, but they are comics that are posted on the Marvel website and that you can read for free. Now, I think that's important. You can read these for free. Now, where this came from, I would say this is an extension of something that has been going on the Marvel Twitter site and the Marvel site itself for quite some time now. It's called Marvel's Make Me a Hero. And what they did in this little internet short, which I think they produced it every week or every 2 weeks. I'm not entirely sure if they're still doing that. I'm a little behind on my cringe watching. But what they do is they take these seemingly random people who wander in, for one reason or another, into the Marvel Comics offices, and they give them this tiny little interview where they ask them, again, very progressive questions, and they get their answers, and an artist uses those answers to draw a superhero based upon these people, and at the end, they give this drawing to the person, and they just ooh and ah over it. So this is an extension, I would say, of that web show, but it is for children. Now let's step back for a second and think about what in the world is the reason for all of this to begin with. What is the reason for Marvel's direction now to begin with? And to talk about that, I'm going to go back to, for a moment, something that I talk about every once in a while. And it is an interview that Willow Wilson did with the New York Times. And I want to go back to that because what G. Willow Wilson said in that interview is reflected to a good extent in this podcast done by Sana Amanat, of course, and these two are buddy-buddy with each other because they are the two people who created Kamala Khan together. But G. Willow Wilson, in that interview with the New York Times, she talked about what she thought artists were supposed to be about, what she thought she was doing as an artist, and what she thought other artists should do. And she thought her job as an artist was to promote a progressive agenda in the minds of people, in a very, and these are her words, in a very subtle way. She said, it is their job to change the world. Not directly, but to use this subtle method of introducing these progressive ideas into the minds of the reader, slowly but surely bending them and bending their minds toward this progressive agenda so that they can then internalize all of this into themselves, start to live it out, and then bring those ideas out into the real world and make change with these progressive ideas. This is what she saw was the job of a writer. But, as she said, everything changed for her when Donald Trump became president. Now, again, he is never named. He is he who shall not be named. She says, when the current administration took power in the White House. After that point, what she saw her job as being was to provide a bulwark, or in other words, a stronghold for the leaders that are opposed to the current administration in the White House, so that she can, and others like her, can provide for these quote-unquote progressive leaders what she calls hope fuel, so that she can give them hope and she can fuel them up again so that when the time is right, they can go back out and reclaim any territory that they have lost. Again, this is what she states to the New York Times openly is her job as a writer. And this idea is reflected very much within this podcast that Sana Amanat is doing about the Marvel Heroes project. Now, something that I had never focused on previously, and we need to look at, is what is this bulwark? What is this stronghold that G. Willow Wilson and I would say Sana Amanat are thinking about when they are talking? Well, is this Stronghold comics? Well, no, it isn't. Is it the medium itself? Is it books in general? Is it entertainment? Well, I would say no, not really. It might be entertainment generally that they are speaking of, but I would say that this stronghold that they wish to build for these progressive leaders is the minds of the people that they ensnare. Are the minds of the people, like she said previously, that they are slowly and subtly turning towards a progressive agenda so that they will accept it unquestionably. And I do mean unquestionably, because if you look at what has been going on for the last year, year and a half, 2 years within the comic industry, if you question in any way the quote-unquote progressive agenda put out by these comic creators, you get shamed, you get attacked, you get doxxed, you get put in your place so that you will never open your mouth ever again. You are made to bend the knee to the progressive agenda, or you are simply gotten rid of. So you need to accept these things unquestionably. And this is what the stronghold is that they are providing for people. These unquestioning minds of their audience, where they are gathering these people together, these unquestioning people who are accepting the progressive agenda, and they're saying to these leaders, these leftist leaders, look at this group of people who will follow you unquestionably, who will follow your progressive lead unquestionably. This should give you hope. This should give you the fuel that you need to go out there and fight once more. So the question then becomes, who is this audience and what do they look like? Well, what Marvel is striving to do over and over again is to change its audience into a predominantly female audience. Now, it has been proven scientifically from the time that people are very small little babies that females are attracted to human faces more than to mechanical things, and males are attracted to mechanical things more than human faces. And this leads to an adulthood where females are more inclined to the emotional and the personal, and males are more inclined towards the mechanical and the impersonal. And the thing is that reason and logic are, to some extent, very mechanical in the way that they express themselves. And so it's really no wonder that Marvel is seeking to get this female audience, because females are more, in general, led by their emotions and less by reason and logic. And this is the exact kind of person that they wish to attract, these people who will accept this progressive ideology, which is irrational at its base, in an unquestioning way. But that's just the beginning. As with this new show, it is a reflection of an old Marvel podcast that was for adults. What they are trying to do with this show is to focus on children. And children are the major focus of the audience that Marvel is trying to attract now. And not just children, but predominantly, again, female children. I just did a video on the last Women of Marvel podcast where they were talking about this new show that was for preschool children, 4, 5, and 6-year-old children. And what Sanamanat said directly was that while this show was for girls and for boys, it was more a focus on the girls. And the boys that were to watch this show, what the parents needed to do, this is her words, she said it was the parents' responsibility to teach their boys to like girl things. Now, note that word. It is their responsibility to teach these boys to like girl things. And they have other cartoon shows which are for older children, and they are specifically directed towards girls. Marvel Rising was, by the words of the producers of the show, specifically given a certain animation studio to do it so that it would attract more girls. And the test audiences that they did for this show were exclusively female. And it's been pointed out by some people in my comments that this has a twofold reason, and they point to statistical evidence for this. Number one, so that they can get to, as I said, an unquestioning audience. This young audience who hasn't really reached the age of maturity, hasn't really reached the age of reason, and therefore they can keep them in this unquestioning state. But not only that, but specifically the females. And why? Because it's been shown that if you wish to change the minds of other people, even people who are conservative, and very staunch in their rationality, the best way to change their minds is through using female children to do so. Because I would say there's something heroic within every male that wishes to protect these small female children. And so they give ear to what these small female children have to say, and they begin to accept it unquestionably. So this is an additional reason why they are trying to capture these female children as their main audience. So after that very long introduction, I'm going to finally get into this podcast itself. And I'm going to give you, first of all, a quote from Sana Amanat, which is at the end of the podcast. Now, I start at the end, as I have said in many other videos, because these people, they give an argument in a very dishonest way. Looking at the way this thing is structured itself will give you an idea into the way that they think and what they're trying to do. What a normal, honest argument would do is to give their thesis at the beginning, then to give you the evidence all the way through the body of what they are talking about, and then at the end give their thesis again so that you can determine for yourself whether or not you accept it on the evidence given. But what these podcasts do, and Sana Amanat is a master at doing this, is they deceive you and manipulate you emotionally to lead you to their end thesis so that you will accept it. What they usually do is they begin with humor, if you want to call it that, because it's the humor of a childless, 30-something-ish, child-minded cat lady. So they lead in with this humor, and then they begin time after time after time to emotionally steer you towards what they want you to accept at the end of their podcast. So this quote is where they are steering you towards. Oh, and just so that you know, I try not to take these things out of context. It's simply that Sana Amanat speaks in a very disjointed way. So this is what she says, and she's talking about this 16-year-old native girl who is the subject of the upcoming Hero Project show. She says, just this idea, this responsibility. We love that word, responsibility. Great power and responsibility. And I think she has this responsibility, and in turn is actually giving power to so many other kids like her, and is using that voice to talk about the importance of telling your own narrative and fighting for the things that you really believe in. Now take note of two words here, responsibility and power. And I'll get back to that in a second. But just after she makes this statement, what do the three women who are on this podcast do? Well, they loop back to the very first of what they're talking about. At the first of this podcast, they give you, again, that little humor of it's starting to snow outside. You should curl up on your couch with a blanket and cocoa and watch this show, this hero project show that's on Disney+. So that's what they talk about at the first. And then after Sana Amanat made that statement, which I just read, they all say, this is the future that we are witnessing, that you should curl up on the couch with your hot cocoa and cry because you see this. And then one of the other presenters says, because you will cry. And Sana Amanat says, cry in a good way. And then the other presenter says, oh, it's a good cry. And then Judy Stevens says, it's a cry that makes you feel good inside. So if that doesn't show you that this is an emotionally tied argument, I don't know what does. And right from there, they move into the statement that it makes you also want to go and do something to make the world better immediately. Sana Amanat says, no, it truly does. You're like, I'm not doing enough. These kids are like 15 and they're going and building houses for the homeless. They are preaching about the importance of protecting the youth, like literally preaching. Those are her words, by the way. It's really good to see, and it's great to share with your family. So again, this goes back to what I was just talking about. Using these children, especially these female children, to get around the rational minds of the audience so that they accept these things in an emotional and unquestioning way. Which, by the way, is the definition of propaganda. And what are you supposed to do? Well, Sana Amanat says, you're supposed to share this with your family. And she says they are literally preaching. What are they preaching? Well, they're preaching this progressive agenda. Now I want to look closely at one of these statements that Sana Amanat just made, because she says it over and over again in different podcasts. She talks about that line from Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. Now here's the thing. What is that responsibility for Peter Parker? Well, I would say that responsibility is to the heroic ideal. Because this centers around the death of Ben Parker. And Ben Parker is a symbol of this heroic ideal. He is your normal, everyday hero. He sacrifices his life for the betterment of his family. This is what he does. He does so in an ordinary but heroic way. And this is what is brought to the attention of Peter, because he discards this. He discards this and he just wants to make easy money. He doesn't care about all these things that his aunt and uncle have taught him. No, he wants to go through the easy path. And what happens when he goes through the easy path? Well, Uncle Ben gets killed. And it is the death of Uncle Ben, it is the death of this ordinary everyday hero that makes Peter Parker realize that he has a responsibility to these heroic ideals. That just as Ben, he is going to be self-sacrificing and heroic, even if it kills him. But the key thing is that it is a responsibility to this heroic ideal, because Ben is this heroic ideal, this normal, everyday hero that sacrifices for his family. But when people like Sana Amanat use this statement, with great power comes great responsibility, what are they talking about? Well, they are not talking about the responsibility to the heroic ideal. Not at all. They are talking about a responsibility to a progressive ideology. And how are they responsible to this end? Well, they are responsible by using power. Because with Spider-Man, with Peter Parker, great power and great responsibility, it is that this power is subject to these heroic ideals. But what Sana Amanat is talking about is that this progressive agenda, this ideology, needs to be brought about in the world through the use of power directly. Now, am I making this up? No, I am not. If you listen to the entire 24-minute podcast, which I'll link in the description for you, so you can do so if you wish. If you listen to that entire segment where she is talking to this 16-year-old girl, the number of times they use the word power within 24 minutes is 12 times. And I'm not even counting the number of times that they use the word superpower or they use the word strength as a substitute for power. If you include those words, along with power and empowerment, it's about once every minute they mention the word power. So let me give you a few short quotes from this 16-year-old activist to show you exactly what I'm talking about. She talks about her first public speaking appearance about a uranium mine when she was 9 years old. And this is what she says. She says, "The feeling that I had of having power and control over the situation, feeling like I could contribute to the solution, feeling like I had a role to play, that feeling never went away." So again, you have this 9-year-old child talking about uranium mining in a public event, and she's talking about having power and control over the situation. And why? Well, because again, they're going to use children, female children specifically, to get into the minds of people so that they accept this progressive agenda. And it's very specifically a progressive agenda. She says just 30 seconds later, and I quote, "I realize that we have a responsibility to use our voice to bring awareness to them." And what she's talking about when she says them is, and I quote, "the atrocities in the world." And what she calls atrocities in the world, she labels as the climate crisis that is going on currently. So again, this is your very progressive agenda. She is saying the climate crisis is atrocities in the world, and it is her and everybody else's responsibility to use their voices to bring awareness to these things. And she goes on to say, "I knew that there was a solution to the problem of the climate crisis, that people weren't talking about, and I knew it was my responsibility as someone who had become aware of it to share that message and to bring hope to the situation." But here again, you have that word, responsibility. And as I was saying, you see here the connection with what I was talking about in Willow Wilson. She is doing this in order to bring hope to the situation. This is that hope fuel that Willow Wilson talked about that she is providing for these quote-unquote progressive leaders. And then, after these statements by this girl, Sana Amanat goes on to say more than once that what she is doing with this responsibility is, in Sana Amanat's words, activating the voices of the other young people around her so that they do the exact same. Again, once again, here we have exactly what Willow Wilson was talking about. To take these progressive ideas into themselves and then bring them out into the world so that they can activate these young voices so that they can change the world through this non-rational, unquestioning acceptance of this progressive ideology. And again, to step back and look at what Marvel is doing here. This is a show which leads into a comic book that is called Marvel's Hero Project. So what are they presenting these heroes as? Again, they're using that phrase, with great power comes great responsibility. So they are saying that we have a responsibility to this progressive agenda, and the way that we bring it about is through the use of power, quite specifically. And this is what they call heroes. This is what they are putting on pedestals as heroes. These children who are literally, as they said, preaching to people about this progressive agenda. These are what they call heroes. People using power directly to get rid of any rational or logical argumentation which other people may have towards what they are trying to do. And again, I'm not pulling this out of my hat. I covered about 6 months ago these creators from Marvel talking about the Captain Marvel movie, and they were asked, all of them, to boil down how they would describe Captain Marvel in one word. And the most common word that they used was powerful. And the context in which they would use this word, they would say that she is uncompromisingly powerful. So this is their idea of what a hero actually is. And this is what they are presenting with their comics and their television shows and all of the rest of their media as a hero. They are trying to, again, steer you in an emotional way to accept that a hero is someone who uses their power to implement a progressive agenda. And of course, anyone who opposes this, especially people who are not being sympathetic, people who are using things like reason and logic, these people are the villains. And so if someone was to ask me, why do I go over this terrain over and over again? It's because of this exact reason. This is what they are presenting to the world as a hero. Someone who uses power directly to triumph over others in order to secure their irrational progressive agenda. And they are trying to use shows like this and comics like this to teach these young children that this is how you become a hero. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like. Hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.